Today I'm going to be talking about a ghost story by Kat Winters called The Uninvited. This is the first Kat Winters book that I have ever read. I actually saw this book mentioned in another video on YouTube. I don't remember which one. If I can remember, I will link it in the description. But essentially I was like, oh, I like ghost stories, and so I want to give this a try. I do actually enjoy ghost stories and horror, but it doesn't have to be like horror. I don't think all ghost stories fit into the big horror label. But I do like little paranormal elements in books. So I wanted to give this one a try. I went over to Hoopla, so I did find the book there, and was able to borrow it quickly and freely. So I grabbed it there and actually listened to the audiobook for it. And I have sort of mixed feelings about the book. I think overall I liked it. I knew there was going to be a twist, and I won't give the twist away, but I knew there was going to be a twist, and it was going to go one of either two ways, and it definitely went the one way. But overall I liked it. So what's this book about? So essentially, we are introduced right away to our main character, Ivy Rowan, and Ivy has recently woken up on the sick bed, and she recalls, I don't remember if she sees it right when she wakes up or if she's recalling something that happened before, but she recalls seeing her grandmother rocking in the rocking chair. The only problem with that is that her grandmother has been dead for a while, and Ivy reveals through that she actually sees or can see the dead and the ghosts of the dead, and that she usually sees them when something bad is going to happen. So when somebody is going to die. That's why I'm thinking maybe she saw it a little bit before. But Ivy wakes up. She has been on her sick bed. She's been very unwell. That's also when we find out that this is set during the World War I era and during the Spanish flu pandemic. And so we are led to believe or understand that Ivy has somehow survived the Spanish flu, that she actually came down with it, but she has somehow recovered. And so she wakes up, and soon after she wakes up, she hears a loud disruption downstairs. Her father and brother have just come home. Her mother is asking what's wrong and what happened, and the father reveals that he and Peter, who is Ivy's brother, have just gone into town, and that they murdered the rotten German in town. And Ivy believes that they did this in order to take revenge for, well, and they actively say that it was in vengeance of, but she believes that they were taking revenge for the death of her other brother, Billy, who just died in World War I. And she's kind of, at that point, fed up with the life that she's living and with her father and her father's violence and alcoholism. And so she decides right then, after she's heard that he's killed someone, to get out of that house. So she packs up her belongings, and that night she goes to leave. Her mother hears her and talks to her, and her mother says, yes, I do believe it's time for you to leave this house. You should leave. So Ivy leaves home, and she goes into town, and she's searching for a place to now stay and live her life. She runs into one gentleman who rents rooms, kind of like a hotel thing. I'm trying to remember the name of what that's called and its spacing. But he turns her onto a more permanent address where there was a widow in town who was looking for a room to rent. He says he doesn't know if she's still trying to, I think he tells her he thinks the sign is gone, but that she should look there. And she remembers her from before. She married somebody that she went to school with. And of course that boy also died in World War I. So she goes to the house, and she meets the young widow, and she asks her about the room to rent. And at first the widow is like, no, I'm not doing that. But then she decides to give Ivy a chance, and she lets her come in. They do discuss what Ivy's plans are, and Ivy would like to begin teaching piano. It was always her goal to become a music teacher, so she'd like to begin that. So she essentially gets to know the young widow, and they start to make friends, and she starts asking questions more about like what happened in town. She wants to know specifically more details about the murder, and she finds out that there were two brothers that owned the shop, and one of them was murdered, and that it's being kind of passed off as that these guys just came through town, they didn't live there. So essentially nobody knows that it was her father and brother. But there were these guys that did it, and it most likely was because they were German, and the one brother was believed to be a spy or have spy connections, and that he had mostly spoken German. There's just all these little tidbits that are thrown at her. And so Ivy resolves to go into town and visit the shop and see what happened and if there's anything that she can do. And she does. She goes and she visits the shop. There are still like blood stains on the floor. The shop is kind of beaten up. It's really a bad kind of environment, and it makes her feel very sad about the whole situation, and of course very guilty and responsible because it was her father and brother. When she goes there, she does see a young man in there, and comes to find out that he is the brother of the murdered victim. And she starts asking if there's anything that she can do, and if she can help with the cleanup and everything. And at first he's very standoffish, and of course he says no, but she keeps pressuring him. And eventually she breaks down his defenses, and he says, fine, you can help me, whatever. And the two start talking, and she learns that his name is Daniel, and that yes, he has a brother, and just all these little details, and the two start to connect. They actually also bond over music. There is a like jazz club or some kind of meeting across the way where jazz music plays from. I think it is an actual club though. So there's a club, and there's lots of jazz music, and they can identify a lot of the music, but at the same time, Daniel's very much like, why can't they play, some Beethoven or some more like classical music? And of course, they won't play any German composers because of the whole World War I issue and the issues with Germany. And other little bits are revealed too. So at this time, not only was it bad for the Germans because of World War I, but in this area, and I think maybe other areas as well, they were being blamed for spreading the Spanish flu. In this case, I believe there was a theater or some kind of gathering where people had been, and they blamed the Germans for bringing the virus into the theater or whatever, and it spread throughout the town. And so we now have a lot of residents in the town that are sick with Spanish flu, and of course dying because it was a terrible, terrible virus. And Daniel kind of explains that whole impact and effect on him, and how it's a very dangerous place to be for him. It's a dangerous life that he's living, where every day his life is threatened because of what's happening and the world around them and what they're taking blame for. So you do get these little bits, and I did find that very interesting, the historical bits, the effect of the Spanish flu and the larger impact of World War I. I mean, if we think things are bad right now, I mean, think about early 1900s when they are going through this huge thing. And it was the first time there was this like really global scale war. And on top of that, for there to be a global pandemic, things seemed very, very dark then. Things seem very dark now, but when you think how much of that was new, you totally get that feeling and effect in this book, that it was so new and so devastating to have these things happening, and how did people cope? And you also see the effects for Ivy, who was a woman at this time, and how little they were allowed to do and able to do. Yeah, that was something else. There are other people throughout town that Ivy gets to meet and interact with. There's a school friend of her brother Billy, the one who died in the war, and his friend wasn't able to go to war because of his vision, and so he is sort of serving as, I don't want to say a spy, but he was like a lookout, so he was monitoring for spies and possible not so good or suspicious activity. And he's very often watching over Ivy as she talks to Daniel. He does not like that she's talking to Daniel. He tries to warn her against talking to that German and interacting with that German and how bad it's going to be for Ivy and that she should stay away from him. And he's like always there in the background, like anything that Ivy does. Like suddenly he'll appear and be like, I saw what you were doing, Ivy. You shouldn't be doing that. And so you'll see him a lot. There are other town residents that Ivy meets. Some of them are, as she, I believe, was returning to her house. Not her family home, but the home with the widow. There is a train coming and she notices that an ambulance is stopped on the train tracks. And so she goes to the tracks and helps the drivers, who I believe were two women drivers, which was also fascinating. So she helps them get the ambulance off the tracks and back onto the road, and then she stays with them as they go to pick up and drop off Spanish flu victims. So like they pick them up and they try to go, I believe, to one hospital, and they have to go somewhere else because everything was overflowing. There was too many people who were sick. In a lot of cases, it was getting to the point where they were like, just leave your dead here and we'll pick them up. It was that part I think was more horrific than most other things. There's also kind of an impending sense of dread and doom around them. I mean, once again, there's this huge pandemic, but Ivy continues to see ghosts, and as she knows, that is a sign that someone is going to die. And so as she continues her relationship with Daniel, she begins to dread and fear for his life, and that he's not going to make it. And then secondarily, she worries, about other people that are in her life. And that's about all I can really explain for this book because I don't want to give too much away. This is, in part, at least, a romance. So there are paranormal elements to this book and there are romantic elements to this book. So if you're not so into that, you may not enjoy this. I do love a romantic plot. I do love supernatural elements. And I did like the twist in it. Like I said, I did sort of see it coming, but I did enjoy it. I thought that it was well done. I did like the atmosphere, the whole atmosphere of this book, because I do think there was always this feeling of kind of dread and an impending sorrow, which I really enjoyed. I thought that it was very well done for that. Yeah, I think I would recommend this book to people who are into supernatural stuff and romance. Do I think it was perfect? No, there were bits that I was starting to get a little, I don't know how to describe it. There were parts that I think could have been handled a little better, but at the same time, I did like a lot of it. I loved when Ivy would go into her backstory about her home life and bits about her brother Billy, who had passed. I mean, I think the saddest part when reading it is I really liked her brother Billy, and I felt so sad about him passing. And like, we never actually got to meet him because he was already dead at the beginning of the book. But just through her stories, you see this kind of romantic dreamer of a character, and he was just pushed down by their father and their father's abuse and alcoholism. And it wasn't okay for Billy to be, telling stories with Ivy. He had to be like working the farm. There's a horrific story where he and Ivy were talking and telling stories, and the dad got really upset and he ends up bashing Billy in the head with a shovel. which is totally terrible. I mean, that was the most visceral and heartrending part of, well, I'll say one of the most visceral and heartrending parts of the book. But just to see what he must have gone through, and then feeling like he had to join the military and go off to fight in World War I, where of course then he loses his life. It's just very tragic, and you never even really get to see the character, but I felt so much for him. So I did enjoy a lot of the book. I don't know why I have semi-mixed feelings, because overall I think it was very successfully done. I don't know. I don't know what it is. There's something that keeps it from being a higher star level, in my opinion. But I would rate this like 3.5 to 4 stars. I thought it was successfully done. I did enjoy it. It was a nice paranormal story. So, yeah. If it in any way sounds interesting to you, give it a read. I do kind of want to read more Kat Winters. I know she has a couple of books where she brings in famous writers for the storyline, so I may look into that. And I think she has another one that is set during the Spanish flu that I may look into. And don't ask me why I want to read about pandemics during a pandemic. I don't know, but it kind of is comforting to me because they survived. Or else we wouldn't be here. So yeah, that's it for this video, but I will be back with more book recommendations. Bye!